B2B marketers, welcome to B2B Beacon's first installment of our Leadership and Luminary series. I'm your host, Thad Kalo, CEO of Business Online and Executive Editor of B2B Beacon. Here we are in the lovely, windy city of Chicago, which just so happens to be host to one of the largest, most impressive, and respected B2B marketing events in the world and associations, the BMA. Without further ado, let's meet our esteemed leaders and luminaries. First, we have Jim Donovan, who is EVP of Sales and Marketing at Black Ice. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dave Grant, who is VP of Industry Marketing for Teradata.
Thank you.
Dave, welcome. And we have Joseph Putaseri, who is VP of Marketing of Cisco. Did I get that correct, Joseph?
Right on.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, one of my favorite topics. I love this notion of customer insights. I think it is at the heart and soul of what makes a great marketer. So my question to you is, do you believe in this notion that sales and engineering had their run? And a lot of the organizations that you've been a part of and have helped to lead have very much been sales and engineering focused. But now, possibly, maybe, we are the conduit to the most valuable asset within any company, which is the customer relationship. Agree or disagree?
I think we're on the start of a transition. I'm not sure we're there yet. But I think that the way in which this works together, sales, engineering, and marketing, is really where the synergy is going to occur. In some business models, it may start from marketing, whether it's an online business, commerce,
Sure.
Software-based business, could very well be. But I'm reticent to sound the death knell of sales and engineering just yet.
Okay, fair enough. Dave?
All right. Well, I totally agree with JP, and I think it is really more about, it's not about customer relationship or marketing insights taking over the other two functions. I think it's really about getting up to a peer level, and then also for that be a closed loop process and synergistic, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the more you can take those customer insights and then feed those back into engineering, so it comes back into the product or solutions you're producing, and then you turn that information over to sales. I think that's where the real power becomes.
Jim, you agree?
Yeah, and I've been struggling to find a word that really encompasses how you look at the customer and how you address them today. And, because the go-to-market is really an interdependent system that's made up of, product, sales, marketing, all working together in a way that is about creating, keeping, growing customers. And it has to become one systematic approach to really work.
Okay. If we believe customers are the most valuable asset within an organization, what are we doing to better understand who they are, what they want of us, what they expect of us in our organizations?
I think what's changing and what's different is that we have capability today in marketing to understand customers in a way that we've never understood before. If you're in sales or in engineering, you're building it off historical perspective. What we're doing in marketing now is getting a real-time perspective.
Yep.
And a sense of what's happening internally within your own organization, but more importantly, what's happening externally. Picking up those signals externally to be able to, educate internally what needs to happen is I think something that marketing as a function can be at the forefront of. There's no question customer insight is going to be the currency within the organization.
Sure.
No question.
So can I dig a bit deeper on that? What specifically are you listening to? What conversations, what data points are you extracting at your level, Joseph, and that's important and salient to making decisions?
We're on a journey, but our starting point is essentially looking at everything we're doing in the way of purchasing behavior, everything that's going on in terms of online behavior, so understanding it on our own properties, really understanding what's happening in our offline channels, whether it's events or email or any kind of direct marketing. And then finally, and this is probably the most powerful, is really picking up the external signals. So when you start to correlate those four big areas, you start to get a really good 360 picture of customer insight. And then you start thinking about, okay, now let's tag all our content. Let's figure out what's going on with content. Can you now use all the data to start being predictive? Can we build a go-to-market model based on that knowledge? Really exciting space, but starting point is a lot of collection. analysis, predictive, I think we're right on the beginning of that phase.
Okay, we'll jump into that in a moment because the notion of external signals and predictive is super hot and sizzling right now.
Absolutely.
So we'll jump into that. But Dave, what do you do to better understand who your customers are?
Well, what we're really trying to do is better understand our customers in context of their buyer's journey. Historically, at Teradata, we looked at it more in terms of the sales process, and we're really taking that whole thing and flipping it on its head, right? And we've got a really simple model for looking at that. We look at the first stage of the buyer's journey around they're in a status quo type of thing, right? They don't feel they need whatever solution or space that we're in, and then they move to exploring solutions. Something's busted them out of that, and then ultimately they select a solution. Well, as you kind of work down that process, we think we understand the buyer the best the further they are down the funnel. We've got a very large, very talented sales force. It gives us a lot of feedback and a lot of direct information. But where we're really lacking is up at the top of that process, right? So what makes somebody, it could be a telecommunications carrier that has a churn problem. Well, what makes them, want to, bust out of that and say, okay, I need to go address this? It's always worth, millions and tens of millions of dollars to them. But what makes them get to the point where they feel it needs to be addressed, right? What kind of content do they assume? What sort of websites do they go? What sort of interactions do they have with their peers? And so that's what we're really trying to get our handle on. And like JP said, that it's a lot of that, implicit information about what content's being consumed, et cetera, like that. And we're really trying to tie that together and get a better understanding of what makes that happen, so we can get our salespeople engaged.
Jim, you're trampling at the bit here.
I can't remember the question. Dave was talking so long.
Thanks, Jim.
No, I can't remember really the exact question that you were.
Insights. How do you find insights around who your customers are and what they want of you?
Yeah. So there's so many sources for data today, and I think the challenge is really getting a comprehensive view of all the potential knowledge you can get around a customer, and then within that, really finding the signal, finding the buying psychology of the customer in that vast amount of data. And I think we're just really scratching the surface on how we're going to be doing this.
So can I challenge you, gentlemen, on one front? And I agree with the majority of that. But I hear this notion of 360-degree source of data around your customers. Is it about all of the data you can collect, or is it about collecting the right data, connecting that data, and driving insights? So you can look at 10% of the data sources that you need to actually drive salient, action as a marketer.
So you're right. It's not about the volume of the data. It's about figuring out where the signal is and asking really, really good questions, and being very objective in the way you ask those questions. Unfortunately, people who are really good at data analytics aren't as good in asking the marketing questions.
Sure.
People who are really good at asking marketing questions aren't that great at data analytics. So actually matching those two capabilities together, where you have expert data individuals who can interpret what questions are being asked and reflect that in the analysis, that's where I think the magic happens. But it's challenging because they speak two different languages.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if I could just drill into that one more second, Joseph, can you give a specific example of a question that was asked of the data where you said that's it, that's the core question that we need to be answering of this data set, and what that set off in the organization, how you actually capitalize on that?
Something I'm sure you're familiar with, and some work that we're doing with a company right now is, we took together 3 pieces of data that were being collected, but not really being correlated or connected. So we had 10 years worth of web history of all the cookie behavior on our websites.
10 years.
10 years.
You must be storing it in Teradata data solutions to get to that.
Indeed we were. But it was just sitting there. And so, the web guys knew that this was important, and they collected it, and it was collecting in this data store, but no one really went and asked any questions of it. We had 10 years worth of booking history, obviously, of all the results of our business and which customers bought. And then we have 10 years worth of offline data, which was, all the emails, the registrations on websites and downloads of white papers and events that people go to. And somebody asked the question, what if we put the 3 together and see if there's any correlation to what's going on in the business, and oh, by the way, could we build a predictive model out of that? And interestingly enough, it was a science project about 4 years ago, and it turns out there's an enormous amount of correlation between web behavior, where people show up, and what they actually purchase. And turning that model into something that's useful and looking at where it might happen in the future and starting to predict, all of a sudden gets very interesting. And where we are now is we're starting to say, well, what if we match that with external data? What would happen then? So the question we asked was, 3 seemingly interesting pieces of data sitting apart, connected together, will that give us some signals? And it absolutely did.
Sounds like it has. And we'll jump into that as well, because I'd love to know what you actually do with those insights. But Dave, same question to you.
I'm like Tim, I can't.
Well, that's okay. Maybe it would, I guess the question is, do you recall a specific scenario where you were sitting in a meeting or having a conversation with a colleague where you were looking at a particular data set and you had a very insightful moment? Someone asked the right question on that data, and then what you did to capitalize on that insight, I guess.
Sure. I don't know if we have maybe as insightful as JP, being a large B2B company. So we're really kind of at the beginning of the journey. And so we're trying to, correlate simple things, right? The whole stages of the waterfall, and then really connect that back to really marketing attribution, and in a very rough stage at this point, really just trying to get some idea of, the type of events we invest in, how many responders are we getting, do they fall down to the waterfall, do they turn into, qualified leads, that type of things. Yeah. And we have an intuitive sense that we're over-investing in traditional forms of marketing, like in-person events, et cetera, like that. Not that they're not still important, and probably under-investing in some of the newer, technologies and online type of things. So we're really, heading down that journey. And now that we're collecting the data in the waterfall, we're really, the questions we're at just are as simple as that, which is, hey, is $25,000 spent on this event? Is that money better spent than $25,000 with an online marketing company?
So there's the next question. So based on your experience, Jim, in the numerous roles that you've held, are we spending the money in the right areas in terms of online to offline around what's important to our customers?
Yeah, and I don't think we know. We know sort of what's working now, and we know based on sort of data points what's not working. And I think there is a dramatic shift is going on to more digital, but how we're spending the money, correlated specifically to an outcome, in a complex B2B buying process. There's still a lot of ways to go to understand that, and to attribute that marketing activity to some financial outcome,
some business outcome. So let me ask the question then. We're all worked in highly technical engineering environments, technology, hardware, you name it. What's taken us so long? I mean, here we have the ability to look at web analytics, connect that to some sort of marketing automation or nurturing, and then to CRM, did they purchase or did they not? Why haven't more B2B marketers closed that sales and marketing loop, which is at our doorstep right now because of the growth of technology, and have taken advantage of those insights that come from that information? Why are we a step behind on that?
I think there's 2 reasons. One is culture and behavior. People are wedded to the ways in which they used to do things. To answer your previous question, I think we're still, as a B2B industry, still over-rotated on outbound marketing and much less focused on inbound. So I think that culture hasn't really changed yet. You're starting to see the elements of it now. The second piece as to why it's taken a while is that the software and the automation is just starting to come together. And it's the companies, the big software and search and web companies that have scaled data in a way that has never been done before. And so he's starting to bring data sets together that were impossible to bring together before. So, the constraints of the technology are starting to go away.
Have been removed.
Yeah,
Yep.
and we can start to ask those really interesting questions.
Teradata's in the data business, right? Why aren't closing that sales and marketing loop, Dave?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is, I'll put it on the cultural category as well, right? Which I think a lot of marketers, don't really understand the metrics they should be measuring themselves on. And sometimes that's maybe because they don't want to be measured on the tough metrics. I mean, what I mean by, even in my own organization, I'll see somebody say, well, we did a campaign and we made, over 100,000 tweets or 100,000 impressions, right? And I'll ask the question, well, where did that show up in terms of qualified leads or sales, whatever? And sometimes you get those blank stares coming back, right? So I think that is a cultural shift. It's not always easy to do the correlation between what we did and how it shows up in revenue, but you have to at least ask those questions and you have to dig into one of JP's previous points. A lot of times that takes data integration. People might answer that question by saying, well, I've only got this piece of information. I don't have that. Well, then it's our jobs to go get it, right? Because we'll never have a full seat at the table unless we can do that full set of connections and show how it shows up as revenue.
Show the closed loop to business outcomes. Jim,
Exactly.
why aren't we doing this?
Well, I think it's a mindset shift that needs to take place at the top of the house. So if you talk about B2B, a lot of it is high touch, high ticket, complex type selling activities, and those traditionally have been done by sales organizations. And as long as that continues to work, the mindset is we count on the sales organization to bring in the revenue, and it works until it doesn't.
Right.
And then when it doesn't is when the shift takes place. And I think in B2B, we're at various places along that path, and it really is that. And I think as sort of the younger generations get to more senior positions, you're going to see that that's just it's a natural way. And I think an indicator of that is if you look in Silicon Valley, you look in that sort of bubble. I would say almost every company is more advanced with what they're doing, even if they are B2B. You get outside of that into sort of the standard mindset of top executives, and it's a stretch.
I like it. And so, Jim, I'll actually leave with you on this one. If we look at the buying journey, and some of us are able to close that loop, understand what's happening from a web and marketing automation to sale perspective, and some of us aren't, but there's enough potentially salient information or insights or signals to talk about success and what may be driving business outcomes or not. Why are we so fixated in B2B on a single lead when we know companies buy from us? 9, 10, for every lead we get, there's 9, 10, 11 folks outside of that are unknown to us that are sending signals that we're not collecting and connecting. How come we haven't evolved beyond that?
Yeah. I think it gets into the complexity of dealing with the environment. That there's a model and a way if you think about approaching the customer, that using buyer's journeys and sort of those techniques, it's very linear, and buying is not linear at all. And as you talked about, very complex when you go into environments where 10, 20, 30 people are involved in the buying process. And I think we're going to start to, see some more maturity about the interrelationships in that buying ecosystem, and data is going to help us to inform that. So it's not just understanding the behavior of a single individual who's showing sort of signs of interest or potential, but it's really looking at that individual and the 28 others involved in that buying process and what that's telling you. And the technology now is emerging to do that. Some of these new analytical techniques like graph and pattern recognition allow you to look at a bigger picture of what's going on. So are we fixated on that lead? Yeah, and I think we will be until again it doesn't work, or there's another technique that trumps it, and I think we're there.
Someone needs to be fired for us to wake up at some point, I guess. So what I also heard was this notion of misalignment, right? Because we are measuring as it relates to our success around the funnel, and yet there's a nonlinear journey that's happening in the buying process. Yeah. How do we reconcile for that? How do we change that? Dave?
Well, I think we do need to change it, but I think it's an evolution. And going back to the previous question around fixating on that single lead, right? That's kind of the first step, and then you do realize it's a more complex, journey, and then that's how you have to get there. But part of the reason that people fixated on a single lead was one, to make sure something real was happening, right? And I think as marketers, once you gain that level of credibility, you have the credibility to go on to the next set of questions. So I'm reminded of an analysis we did at the end of last year. We took a couple of new customer wins that took an 18-month journey, and we just did a simple two-dimensional analysis. Well, how many people responded to our marketing campaigns, in what manner, right? and then at what stage in the buying cycle, and just put it on a 2x2 and showed that to the senior leadership and the sales leads. And it was really an eye-opener for them, so that they could really start to connect the dots and to see, okay, it didn't start with just a single lead. It is more complex than that.
Yeah.
And then also, that's an interdependent system between sales and marketing, right? Originally, there was this sort of notion that marketing, kicked things off with brand awareness and then a lead and handed things off to sales. What we found was it was all interconnected. In fact,
throughout the entire journey.
Throughout the entire thing. In fact, there was peaks, in the marketing activity via the website and et cetera, which were very near the end of the sales cycle, which is counterintuitive to what people thought. They thought, okay, well, once our sales teams are engaged, they don't need to go to the website or do any of those types of things.
Yep. Anything to add to that, Jesse?
The marketing discipline has a tendency to create over-complex models for everything. And what we needed was a first place to start to have a conversation. And it happened to be leads because it's the closest thing to revenue that you can address, right? Yep. But to the broader point of your question is there are a lot of other things that we track and can identify, but the reality is we needed a place to start. And it was as close to the revenue as possible.
It's an indicator.
It's an indicator.
It's an indicator. Okay, fair enough. We buy differently. What have we seen as we study and obsess with this notion of the buying journey and collecting these data sources? What are we learning from how our customers are buying from us and how that's changed over the last 12 to 24 months? Anyone?
Jim, you go.
Jim?
How they're buying, I think the shift that's started, it's underway and will continue, is how they get influenced in a buying process. And I think that's really key. So we as marketers need to think about that differently, and they talk about 60 to 70% of the buyer's journey happens before they engage a salesperson. And while that, at times and on average may be true, I think it's more about how much influence you actually can have in a buying process as a company, as the channels and the places they go to get information around the buying continue to increase. So for marketers, I think the real key is to understand the complexity of what is going on and understanding how you interject yourself into that in the most effective means.
But when you look at that complexity, what are the top 3 things that we notice have changed that is happening right now that wasn't happening 12 months ago or 24 months ago?
Oh, it's huge. Consumption models have changed completely. We're going from CapEx to OpEx models like in businesses that we didn't think would ever change that way. We're going from a big injection of investment up front for technology to smaller investments and buy as you grow.
Minimal viable product.
Call it SaaS, call it cloud, call it whatever you want to call it. But the fundamentals of the technology industry and software industry are changing as dramatically as it's ever done in the IT industry. Given that, marketers all of a sudden have been thrust into the front room to say, tell me what's going on, because how our customers are consuming is very, very different. Right? It's not just about the buying journey, it's about their whole consumption model.
Yep. Dave?
And I think one of the things that's always been consistent about how buyers buy, especially with big ticket, complex solutions, right, is they want information from people they can trust.
That's true.
Right? So that's been consistent throughout the ages, I think forever will be.
Yep.
Now what has changed is how they have access to that information, right? So it used to be that you had to be sitting face to face across the table from somebody, whether that was a trusted salesperson, was a colleague, etc. But now, of course, with the obvious things, social media, other connection points like that, you can get access to a lot more people, and then also you can have some third-party sources, which can be trusted, right?
Yep.
Because there's transparency out there, there's rating systems, whatever, and people are exposed, right, if they're doing this for other purposes, right? So you have these trusted sources, and then so you have additional places. It's really the medium, but gets you to that trusted expert, right? And then the velocity of information, right? If you're don't have the person's best interest, you'll be exposed very quickly, right? And if you do, then you can get much more exposure and reach very quickly as well.
Yeah, you brought up an excellent point, Dave. I think we have this notion of content as currency. I would actually drill one layer deeper and say it's actually social proof persuasion is the true currency of the modern day marketer, right? When you can actually validate your brand and your assumptions and your value proposition to the market through the lens of someone who's worked with you and experienced that goes so much farther than you ever telling the world what you're all about. So have you had experiences in success with the notion of social proof persuasion, and what did you do to amplify that? That's a mouthful, sorry.
Let me think about that.
Social persuasion.
Well, one thing that's sort of a related point to that, Thad, is that when we found out, 4 or 5 years ago, we launched our first really big online social community, right? And we just thought people would be, flocking to it, and it was a shiny new object and whatever. And it had a lot of the content, right? And it was very valuable and things like that. And we just thought people would be flocking to this thing. What we actually found out was it really became complementary to the things we did in person. And the strongest relationships online were a continuation of those relationships that were formed offline. Or that we would do things like we called the community the river. And what we found was when we got people to introduce each other in the river, then they were anxious to have a face-to-face connection, right? So my point really being there that I think that social persuasion and social currency, right, is still a lot of those things are different and accelerated online, but it's a lot of that face-to-face interaction and that trust, right? At the end of the day, you might be reading a white paper, but you really kind of want to know who's behind that, who's the thought leader behind that, and if you've met that person and you believe in them and trusted them, it'll take off much quicker.
Yeah, so I think this whole concept of influence marketing is one that's going to gain a lot of traction. And what I mean by that is it's not just you directly putting stimuli out there or inviting people in to engage with you. It's going to be really planting seeds throughout the whole ecosystem. And you have to start, you think about what do people value, and in business they value success. Success comes from their ability to take action and learn, and and I think we need to start thinking about how do we enable people to learn. And I think every company, if they have something of value to deliver, thinks that if my customer only really saw clearly the value that is in this, they would buy it, they would flock to it. So how do we help people learn and come to that same conclusion? And so I think that concept of influence marketing is part of it. I think being able to teach and help people to learn to become more productive, more valuable to their organization, more successful. And does it happen through social media channels? Yeah, I think that's one element where the conversation of learning goes on, and where you can sort of listen in and gain insight into what do they want to learn about.
Yep. So it's important, but we're just at our infancy in figuring out actually how to take advantage of it. Is that fair, Joseph?
We did an experiment about 3 years ago where we decided that we would do a lot more video than we'd done before. And a lot of the video that we'd done prior to that was, wood paneling, people in suits, product. It was all very structured, scripted, etc. We tried this experiment where we took a couple of guys, just really smart and, more importantly, really funny, and put them in front of the camera and said, just go for it. Here's a whole bunch of product, do whatever you want. And they built this show called TechWise TV, and they went from a following of about 10,000 users a year to now they have millions of people just literally coming to watch the show, and they talk technology, but it's hilarious. There's a show in the Bay Area called on NPR called Click and Clack. They do this thing on a Saturday morning about problems with cars, and these two guys do the same thing with networks, and they've got a following. They've got rock star status at Interop, and people are chasing them at the airport in India and Beijing, and they've got
radio guys nonetheless, huh?
They're amazing,
radio guys.
amazing, right? So, but that was the thing. They were real. They were genuine. You got the real characters, and they happened to talk about technology. So it was just this really nice, humanizing of the technology that really worked well for us.
You know, your colleague Tim Washer sat here a moment ago and shared that the notion of humor and how it can actually diffuse, you know, that the whole notion of business properness, for lack of a better word, and get people really engaged in that authenticity. And I thought it was actually an excellent point for B2B marketers. Well, you know, at the close, this has been fantastic, by the way, gentlemen. I appreciate the insights and knowledge you're sharing. I'd love to know if you were to give advice to B2B marketers, the modern B2B marketer out there, what would you want to tell them in terms of customer insights? What should be important to them, should be on their roadmap now that currently is not? What advice would you impart?
Think about that a little bit.
So let me take a little diversion from it.
Sure, absolutely.
Because we're at the end here. And
Why not?
Sort of putting forward a point of view, and I think it is thinking about the buyer's journey differently, how buyers are buying, and I don't think it's a linear process. You know, it's non-linear. It's one that is, you know, it's more sort of biological and it's changing and adapting than it is mechanistic. You know, it's a science, and then you put a math equation in, you get the answer out, and somebody buys something. And so with that, I think we really need to think about the buyer's journey more as a network. And within that network, you know, there are you know, nodes in there. There are hotspots. There are, you know, just basic network theory of how things come together, where you know, can create influence. You become part of an environment of the network as a seller, and your way of maneuvering to create a buyer is going to be vastly different than sort of following some linear buying process. And while, you know, I didn't articulate that as clearly as I want, I really think it's going to be a whole different way of thinking about how people buy, because it's not linear, it's non-linear, it's not a funnel, it's more like a network of influence that's always at play, and every activity in that network changes the dynamic in that network that you need to listen, monitor, and figure out where you influence to create, you know, sort of that end result, the hotspot where the answer is they're buying from you.
So we're solving a different problem than we've solved in the past as marketers, and the notion of an analogy of network as the framework for solving that problem. I think that's an excellent point. Gentlemen.
Right. Well, I pick up on what Jim said. I think he's absolutely right, which is when you deal with very large organizations and how they buy, it is more similar to a network of nodes. But I'd also take it back to, you know, crawl, walk, run, right? And so, you know, in our sales, what we often find is there's one champion that helps bring the sale through, right? If you only started with understanding how that champion got involved at the beginning of the buyer's journey and came on through, and if you understood that, and then maybe you take a look at that and then layer on, you know, more people. Well, who influenced that, you know, champion? Who influenced the approver? And kind of layer that on. That might be, you know, one piece of advice that I would have, right? So that we're not trying to boil the ocean, you know, right out of the gate, right? Because some level of understanding is better than none. That would be my thought.
That's great.
I think my starting point would be to say it's time that as marketers that we took a seat at the big table and really looked at the business like an owner in the business, and saying, okay, if we're going to acquire customers, we're going to cross-sell, upsell customers, we're going to continue to enrich our loyal customers, what do we need to do for the business? Now, it turns out in marketing you have a lot of dials you can turn, a lot of tools you can use, a lot of techniques now that are very, very contemporary and new and different from what we used to use before. But when you frame it in the way of what do we need to do for the business, and then work your way back to the tools that are required to get you there, then the insights become really important. You can tie it and align it. If you start with the idea of I want the latest and greatest technology tools to try and give me some insight, you have no sense of how it connects with the business. It doesn't get very far.
Absolutely, and I would wholeheartedly concur, and I would even say you brought up a really interesting point around the fact that we should have a seat at the big table and take the responsibility. And one of the VPs of HT Supply said that also means just the same way sales takes responsibility. They don't hit numbers, their ass is on the line as well. And I think that's an excellent point, because it is our time, and we should have visibility and impact on business outcomes and take the reward and risk that comes with that.
Absolutely.
I think that's excellent.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, Jim, Dave, Joseph, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
It's been great.
All right.